I wouldn't say that I agree with that completely. I know that I have some insecurity problems. Most overachievers do.
The man who built the world's first 24-hour news network forgot the name of his own disease on live television. Ted Turner sat across from a reporter in 2018 and could not remember a single word. He died on the 6th of May, 2026, at the age of 87. The empire he created was massive, but the pain he carried was even bigger. This is the heartbreaking story of his final fall. The final goodbye at Lamont. The morning Ted Turner left this world was quiet and warm in northern Florida. He passed away peacefully on the 6th of May, 2026, surrounded by family at his Avalon plantation in Lamont. This was the same 8,000-acre property where he had married Jane Fonda 35 years earlier. The setting felt cruel in its beauty. 8 years before, he had told the entire country that his mind was slowly slipping away from him. Back in September of 2018, Ted sat down with reporter Ted Koppel on CBS Sunday Morning. He looked thinner than fans remembered. He told the cameras that he had Lewy body dementia. Then came the moment that broke millions of hearts at home. Ted tried to name his own disease and could not. He paused. He searched his memory. He finally whispered that he could not remember what his sickness was called. The man who built a global news network could no longer hold on to a single word. Koppel asked him gently if he ever thought about ending things himself. Ted shook his head firmly. He said he had 5 children and 14 grandchildren, and would never put them through that kind of pain. He spoke from experience because his own father had done exactly that when Ted was just 24 years old. After that interview, Ted slowly faded from the public eye. His daughter Laura Turner Seidel told reporters her father was exhausted and forgetful. She said nature was healing him while his memory kept fading. He stopped attending big events. He spent more time at the Flying D Ranch in Montana, surrounded by the bison he loved. In January of 2025, he was rushed to a hospital with pneumonia. The illness is often deadly for people with his condition. He fought through it and went into rehab. The family hoped he would bounce back the way he always had. He celebrated his 85th birthday in November of 2023 with only family by his side. That party turned out to be his last public moment. When his children gathered around his bed in May of 2026, they were saying goodbye to a man who had been disappearing for years. Long before the dementia stole his memory, Ted had already lost something even more important to him. The children he could not reach. Ted Turner had 5 kids, and each one carried a unique piece of his complicated heart. Laura Lee was born first in 1961. Then came Teddy the Fourth in 1963, Rhett in 1965, Bo in 1968, and finally Jenny in 1969. From the outside, they looked like a perfect family inside a perfect Southern empire. Behind closed doors, they barely saw their famous father at all. Ted himself admitted the truth in his autobiography titled, "Call Me Ted." He said he worked so hard that he never had as much time for his family as he wished. After he bought the Atlanta Braves in 1976, his evenings belonged to ball games. His mornings belonged to meetings. His weekends belonged to sailing races and ranch trips. His children grew up watching their father on television because he was almost never sitting at the dinner table. Teddy the Fourth said something heartbreaking in the documentary Call Me Ted. He explained that his father was always trying to prove something to his own dad. Whenever his grandfather Ed was around, Ted somehow felt like a failure. That feeling never really left him. It just got passed down to his own boys, who spent their lives chasing the same approval Ted had once chased so desperately. When Jane Fonda spoke about Ted on the day of his death, she shared one of the most honest lines anyone has ever said about him. She wrote on Instagram that being married to Ted was complicated, but being his child was even more complicated. She had become a stepmother to all 5 kids during her marriage with him. She loved them deeply. She watched them try to build a relationship with a father who was always running toward the next big thing. There was also a quiet sadness inside the official Turner Enterprises announcement of his death. Ted had been preceded in death by one of his grandchildren. The family never shared the name out of respect for those still grieving. That single line in the obituary spoke volumes about a man who outlived people he should have been protecting. Behind all of this was a secret Ted had been carrying since 1985. His second wife had finally convinced him to see a doctor. The diagnosis explained his explosive moods and sleepless nights. And the woman who tried hardest to heal that broken man was about to walk into his life and break his heart all over again. The love that slipped away. Ted Turner met Jane Fonda when both of their lives were falling apart. She was leaving the politician Tom Hayden. He was leaving his second wife, Jane Smith. By the year 1990, the two were dating, and the entire world watched in disbelief. They got married on December the 21st of 1991 at his Florida plantation. It was Jane's 54th birthday. 1 week later, Time magazine named Ted the Man of the Year. The fairy tale lasted exactly 1 month. Jane was sitting in a car at the CNN Center one afternoon when she spotted a familiar woman walking out of the hotel lobby. She picked up the phone and called Ted's assistant. She demanded to know if Ted had pulled what he liked to call a nooner. The assistant stammered. The assistant lied to protect her boss. But Jane already knew the truth. When Ted got into the car, Jane began hitting him with the heavy car phone, again and again. She poured a water bottle over his head. She told him she hoped it had been worth it, because he had just blown everything between them. According to her own memoir, she even thought about how this scene would look in a film. Ted begged her for forgiveness on his knees. She gave him another chance. For the next 7 years, Ted kept his promise to her. They sailed together. They worked on environmental causes together. They threw legendary parties at his ranches together. Then Jane found God in 1999, and Ted could not understand the change in her. He thought she was leaving him for a religion he had walked away from many years ago. In 2001, the marriage finally ended. Jane wrote that on the day they parted, Ted flew her back to Atlanta. As she drove away from the airport in a rental car, the woman who would replace her was already waiting in his hangar. Jane wrote one line that has haunted readers ever since. She said her seat was still warm. After the divorce, Ted started openly dating 4 different women at the same time. Each girlfriend got about 1 week per month with him. He told Piers Morgan years later that Jane was probably the love of his life. She felt the same way about him until the very end. But the loneliness after Jane was nothing compared to the financial earthquake that was about to swallow his entire empire whole. The $8 billion storm. In January of 2000, the world watched the largest corporate merger in American history take place. AOL announced it was buying Time Warner for around $182 billion. Ted Turner stood beside the deal and called it the most exciting moment of his life. He compared his enthusiasm to the night he married his third wife. He owned the largest single stake in Time Warner. He believed the future was finally his to shape. Within months, the dot-com bubble burst. AOL stock began falling like a brick from the sky. By 2002, the merged company reported a yearly loss of nearly $99 billion. It was the biggest annual loss any American company had ever recorded. Ted's personal fortune crashed from $10 billion down to around $2 billion. He had lost roughly 80% of everything he owned. The empire he had built over 30 years was disappearing every single day. He told the Bozeman Daily Chronicle later that he had lost 80 cents on every dollar of his wealth. He admitted that if he had not done that deal, he could have given much more money away to causes he loved. On the program 60 Minutes in 2008, the host, Morley Safer, told him he had been losing nearly $10 million a day for 2.5 years. Ted laughed nervously and said he kept getting his thousands and millions and billions mixed up. His daughter Laura sat on that same couch and admitted something terrifying. She told the world that during those darkest financial years, the family genuinely worried that Ted, just like his own father, might end his life. The pressure was crushing him from every angle. The boardroom became a battlefield. Ted blew up at Chief Executive Jerry Levin in front of every single director. The company eventually pushed Ted out of his executive role. They offered him $1 million a year to stay on quietly as a vice chairman. Ted turned it down with fire in his voice. He told them they could take that money and shove it. In January of 2003, he resigned from the company. By 2006, he had walked away from the board completely. He had given the keys to his kingdom to strangers. He never got it back. Even as his money disappeared, his giving heart refused to stop. But the empire he was trying to save with charity was already cracking on the inside. In September of 1997, Ted stood at a United Nations dinner in New York and shocked the entire room. He pledged $1 billion to support the United Nations over 10 years. At that moment, it was the largest individual gift in the history of charity. He told Larry King later that night that he was no poorer than he had been 9 months before, and the world was much better off. He grinned and said $1 billion was a good round number. When the AOL crash wiped out his fortune 3 years later, Ted was suddenly forced to keep that promise the hard way. He could no longer write checks the way he used to. But he refused to break his word to the world. He kept paying that pledge for almost 20 years. He finally finished it in 2015, after losing 80% of his wealth. He still called it the best investment he ever made. Ted also became the largest individual landowner in America at one point. He bought roughly 2 million acres across 19 ranches in states like Montana, Colorado, New Mexico, and Nebraska. He raised 45,000 bison, the largest private herd anywhere in the world. He believed bringing back the bison would help heal the American plains. In 2002, he opened Ted's Montana Grill with a partner named George McCarrow Jr. The goal was to create a market for bison meat and fund the rescue of the species. At its peak, the chain had 55 locations across 14 states. By 2020, that number had fallen to around 41. Restaurants closed in Atlanta, Boulder, Kansas City, and Lexington. The flagship in Larimer Square in Denver shut its doors in May of 2023 after more than 20 years. Ted also helped launch the Nuclear Threat Initiative with Senator Sam Nunn in 2001. He gave another $250 million to fight the spread of dangerous weapons. In total, his lifetime giving reached around $1.3 billion. Even as his fortune shrank, his generosity never did. But Ted always kept one truth hidden behind his charity work. The reason he could not stop running, the reason he could not stop giving, the reason he could not stop building, all came back to a young girl who once cried in a bedroom near Savannah, and Ted listened to every single scream of hers. The sister whose cries he never forgot. Sarah Jean Turner, known to family as Mary Jean, was Ted's only sibling. She was born in 1941, 3 years after him. She was bright. She was funny. She adored her older brother more than anyone else in the world. Ted promised himself he would always protect his little sister. Then everything fell apart when she turned 12. Mary Jean was struck by a rare and brutal form of lupus. The disease attacked her body without warning. She also developed encephalitis, which damaged her brain so badly that she could barely communicate. For 5 long years, Ted watched his little sister deteriorate slowly. The pain only grew worse with each passing month. In his autobiography titled Call Me Ted, he described scenes that no child should ever witness. He wrote that as her pain increased, she would sometimes bang her head against the bedroom wall. He wrote that the most difficult times were when she would scream and beg God to let her die. He was just a teenager. He had no power to stop any of it. He could only stand in the doorway and listen to her cries. Before all of this happened, Ted had been a deeply religious young boy. He attended McCallie School, a Christian military academy in Chattanooga. He had been saved 4 separate times. The famous preacher Billy Graham had personally prayed with him at one of his crusades. Ted briefly thought about becoming a missionary. He believed God answered prayers. He prayed for 30 minutes every single day for 3 full years for his sister to get well. Mary Jean died at the age of 17. She had screamed for an end. Heaven seemed to ignore her completely. Ted's faith collapsed in that very moment, and he never built it back up. He told an interviewer years later that her suffering shook him because she had never done anything wrong in her life. He said Christianity could not give him any answers, so his belief was shaken to the core. By the time he was 20, he was agnostic. By his 30s, he had become an atheist completely. He admitted in interviews that his brain had blocked out most of the details of her death. His mind found a way to bury what was too painful to remember. But the deepest wound of all had not yet arrived in his life. The man he loved most in this world was about to walk into a bathroom with a gun. The father who pulled the trigger. When Ted was just 4 years old, his father, Ed Turner, enlisted in the United States Navy. Ed took his wife and baby daughter, Mary Jean, with him to the Gulf Coast. He left little Ted alone at a Cincinnati boarding school. The little boy ate his dinner by himself in the cafeteria every single night. Ted later told biographers that he never wanted to feel isolated or fenced in again. The fear of being abandoned never left him for the rest of his life. After the war, the family settled in Savannah, Georgia. Ed sent Ted to Georgia Military Academy. Then, at age 12, Ed shipped him as a boarding student to McCallie School in Tennessee. Ed had a temper that grew worse when he drank alcohol. When Ted misbehaved, Ed beat him with a leather razor strap, or sometimes with wire coat hangers. Ted's mother stood outside the door begging her husband to stop. Sometimes she screamed too. Ed never listened to her cries. A painful moment of Ted's childhood came when he was about 6 years old. Ed told the boy that the spankings hurt the father more than they hurt the son. Then Ed handed Ted the razor strap himself. He lay face first on the bed. He ordered his son to spank him. Ted tried to obey his father. He could not bring himself to do it. He told The Hollywood Reporter many years later that he could not hit his father, simply because he loved him too much. Ed Turner also told his son something cruel that haunted Ted for the rest of his life. He said Ted might one day become adequate, but he would never be more than adequate. That single sentence drove Ted to build CNN. It drove him to win the America's Cup. It drove him to own the Braves. It drove him to give away $1 billion. He spent his whole life trying to prove his father wrong about him. On the 5th of March, 1963, Ed Turner finally surrendered to his depression. He had just made a huge billboard purchase that scared him deeply. Days before, he had called Ted to say he wanted to sell the company. Ted begged him not to quit. Ed went up to his bathroom near Savannah. He pulled the trigger of a handgun. He left a short note for Ted. The note simply said he was sorry. That was the heartbreaking life of Ted Turner, a man who built everything yet quietly lost the people he loved. Drop your honest thoughts about his story down in the comments below.